They laughed when I cried at my father's funeral. It wasn't loud, just a ripple of whispers, a few tight smiles curling in the pews, but it hit harder than any shout could have. I had tried to stay unnoticed, slipping into the back of this small country church as the organ groaned overhead, but the tears betrayed me. One slipped down my cheek before I could wipe it away, and that's when I heard it. The muffled snicker from the front row where my sister Sarah sat, perfectly composed in her expensive black dress. She leaned sideways to whisper something into Thomas's ear, and though I couldn't hear the words, I didn't need to. He grinned, wide and toothy, like this was all some grand joke. Even Aunt Marla, who had been dabbing her eyes dramatically just a moment before, let out a tiny chuckle and shook her head. I stayed rooted to the doorway, the old wooden floor cold beneath my heels, feeling 100 pairs of eyes brush over me, and then quickly, deliberately look away, as if my grief was something embarrassing, something inappropriate for the tidy little performance they had staged here. The smell of lilies was thick in the air, sickly sweet and cloying, and the stained glass windows cast fractured colors across the polished caskets and floral arrangements, making everything look unreal, distant, as if I had stumbled into a theater, production where I didn't belong. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach, willing myself to breathe, to stay still. If I turned around now, if I fled the way they clearly wanted me to, they would win. And I wasn't here to let them win. It hadn't started today. The erasure had been slow, careful, like a picture fading from too much sunlight. One Christmas, there was no stocking for me above the fireplace, only an awkward excuse from Sarah about keeping things simple this year. The next Easter, I wasn't even told there would be a family brunch until I saw the pictures online, everyone smiling around a table I had helped set so many times before. When Dad first got sick, they sent a group email about hospital shifts, but somehow I was always covered, always updated later. It was easier, they said. Easier if Sarah handled everything. Easier if Thomas managed the accounts. Easier if I just stayed away. At first, I fought it, calling, texting, offering to fly in, to help, but every message went unanswered just a little too long. Every conversation ended with that tight, polite finality that said, without words, "You're not needed here." Eventually, even my stubborn hope began to wither. By the time Thanksgiving came and went without a single call, without even a forwarded photo of Dad carving the turkey, I understood. They had already written me out of the story. I was a loose thread, trimmed cleanly away so the new tapestry could hang smooth and perfect for everyone else to admire. And still, standing there in that heavy, perfumed church, watching the people who had once been my family wipe away crocodile tears, I wanted so badly to believe that somehow, somewhere, Dad had remembered me, that he hadn't let them erase me, completely. The stupid, stubborn part of my heart still held on to that tiny hope, even as the last shreds of it burned quietly inside my chest. The service ended with the final hymn, a droning, half-hearted rendition of Amazing Grace that barely stirred the dust motes swirling in the shafts of colored light. People stood in stiff clusters afterward, murmuring polite condolences already, edging toward their cars and their real lives. I stayed back, waiting for the room to empty, pretending to study the stained glass as I listened to the clack of heels on tile and the low hum of engines starting outside. When the last echoes faded, I slipped down the narrow hallways toward the small office where Dad had met with the minister during his final weeks. It was a strange impulse, but grief makes strange pilgrims of us all. The office smelled of old paper and lemon polish, and tucked behind the modest desk was a battered oak filing cabinet, one I recognized immediately. Dad's cabinet. The same one he kept at home until Sarah insisted he declutter and modernize. I pulled the drawer open and ran my fingers along the neatly labeled folders, finances, medical records, church newsletters, until something near the back caught my eye. A plain manila envelope, creased at the corners with my name written across the front in my father's unmistakable, careful hand. I hesitated only a moment before sliding it out and opening the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded into thirds. I unfolded it with trembling hands and read, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say goodbye properly. I know it's been hard. I know they made it harder. But you were never forgotten. You were never anything but enough. The truth will find you, kiddo. I made sure of it. I sat down hard in the cracked leather chair, the letter shaking in my hands. It wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't just bad luck or miscommunication or timing. They had pushed me out. They had lied. To him, to me, to everyone. And now they were smiling over cold casseroles and half-hearted condolences, thinking the story was finished. But it wasn't finished. Not yet. They hadn't erased me because they stopped loving me. They erased me because I was inconvenient, because I stood in the way. I saw it more clearly now, like a photograph coming into sharp focus. The whispers that started the year Dad's health declined. The urgent family meetings I wasn't invited to. The sudden renovations to Dad's house under the excuse of making it more marketable someday. The quick, casual comments from Sarah about how it might be better for Dad to sell and move somewhere smaller. How Thomas, ever the smooth talker, had floated the idea of unlocking equity to give Dad a little extra comfort, while quietly lining up appraisers and loan officers behind the scenes. The house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a jackpot waiting to be cracked open. Dad's modest savings, his pension, the insurance policies he had faithfully paid for decades, they had turned into a prize purse, one they didn't want to split any more than necessary. And me? I was the loose end. The name they couldn't quite erase from the official paperwork, but could erase from Dad's heart if they fed him enough stories. She's busy. She's moved on. She doesn't care. Maybe in his worst days, Dad had believed them. Or maybe he had just been too tired to fight. The tide. Either way, I understood now why Sarah had worn that smug little smile at the funeral. Why Thomas had looked so eager when the minister mentioned the reception at the family home. It wasn't grief that filled their eyes. It was anticipation. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope, and tucked it inside. My coat. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried me along with him. But Dad had left a different kind of inheritance for me, one that wasn't measured in dollars or deeds. He had left me the truth, and soon, so would the world. I didn't make a scene. I didn't confront Sarah or Thomas or Aunt Marla as they posed for pictures by the flower arrangements, arms draped casually around one another like survivors of some great, noble battle. No, that was their language. Noise, spectacle, performance. I spoke in quieter tones. Tones that took longer to be heard, but when they landed, they stayed. Instead, I waited until the reception at the house. I moved through the familiar halls like a ghost, smiling tightly when necessary, sipping flat ginger ale from a paper cup while I watched the vultures circle. I saw the way Thomas nudged Sarah and nodded toward the fireplace, the one Dad and I had rebuilt together when I was 14. I heard Aunt Marla, not bothering to lower her voice, remark, "Well, it's a good thing the house will be sold soon. Too much upkeep for just Sarah and Thomas to manage. Too much upkeep, as if memories could be mopped away like dust." When no one was looking, I slipped into Dad's old study. The heavy desk, the worn leather chair, the shelves lined with books he had read so many times their spines were cracked and faded, and there, exactly where he had promised in his letter, taped to the underside of the desk drawer, was a small key. Simple, unmarked, familiar. The safe deposit box at First National Bank. The one nobody else even remembered existed. I closed my fingers around it, feeling the cool bite of metal against my skin. Dad hadn't just left behind a letter. He had left behind proof. Proof they couldn't erase, couldn't rewrite, couldn't spin into another sanitized family myth. I tucked the key deep into my coat pocket and slipped back into the hallway before anyone noticed I was gone. Sarah was laughing in the kitchen, a too loud, too false sound, as Thomas balanced 2 paper plates piled high with catered finger foods. They didn't see me. They weren't looking, and that was their first mistake. The second was assuming the story was over. The third, they would learn soon enough. The memorial reception unfolded like a poorly directed play. Sarah floated from group to group, clutching a wine glass she barely sipped, her voice dropping into a perfect quiver every time she mentioned Dad's final days and how she had been by his side through everything. Thomas hovered close behind, throwing in casual remarks about how overwhelming it had been, how much work it would be to handle the estate. Each time he said the word estate, his voice grew a little louder, a little more self-important, as if he were already measuring the drapes for a life funded by someone else's sacrifice. I leaned against the worn doorframe of the study, unnoticed, watching them spin their stories like spiders weaving a web over Dad's memory. They spoke of duty, of loyalty, of family, each word a thread meant to bind the onlookers to their version of events. The guests, old friends, distant cousins, well-meaning neighbors, nodded and murmured, accepting the narrative as easily as taking a second slice of cake. It was easier that way. People liked tidy stories, heroes and martyrs, villains safely tucked away out of sight. At one point, Aunt Marla clinked her glass with a spoon and called for everyone's attention. Her voice, thin but clear, filled the room. "We just want to thank everyone for being here today, to honor a wonderful man and to support his family, Sarah and Thomas, who stood by him with such love and devotion." She didn't even glance toward me, didn't say my name, didn't acknowledge that I existed, and no one corrected her. Not one face in that crowded, over-perfumed room turned toward the quiet figure standing at the edge, holding all the memories that none of them seemed to want. Sarah pressed a tissue to the corner of her dry eyes and smiled bravely. Thomas wrapped a performative arm around her shoulders. The applause that followed was polite, brief, meaningless, just enough to seal the illusion. I stayed still, the key in my pocket digging into my thigh with every breath. Let them have their performance. Let them bask in their hollow victories. The real show hadn't started yet, and when it did, they wouldn't be ready for the final act. The lawyer cleared his throat, a small, deliberate sound that cut through the low hum of conversation like a scalpel. "Before we conclude," he said, voice steady but carrying, "there is an addendum to Mr. Callahan's will, executed 3 months prior to his passing." The room stiffened. Polite smiles faltered. Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the paper plate in his hand sagging slightly. Sarah's fingers tightened around the stem of her wineglass, the brave widow facade slipping just a hair. And that was my cue. I straightened from the doorframe where I had waited, unseen, all afternoon. The old floorboards under my boots groaned, softly, just once, as I stepped forward. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned, chairs creaked. I walked slowly, steadily, the key in my coat pocket bumping against my side with every measured step, a quiet drumbeat only I could hear. The scent of lilies from the floral arrangements thickened the air, sticky and oppressive. In that moment, it was as if the years of silence, the missed holidays, the empty chairs at family tables, all of it gathered around me, wrapped itself around my shoulders like a heavy, invisible mantle. But this time, I didn't flinch under the weight. I wore it like armor. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, whether in protest or panic I couldn't tell, but she said nothing. No one said anything, not Thomas, not Aunt Marla, not the guest who had clapped so dutifully minutes ago. They simply watched as I crossed the room and stood beside the lawyer, shoulder to shoulder, not defiant, not aggressive, just present. Unavoidable. For the first time that day, the performance stopped, and the real story finally began. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, unfolded a second sheet of paper, and began to read. His voice, calm and deliberate, filled the room like a rising tide, unstoppable and indifferent to the wreckage it would leave behind. "To my daughter," he began, and the air seemed to thin, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The one who never asked for anything. The one who stayed, even when distance and silence made it easier to walk away. Sarah flinched visibly. Thomas shifted, glancing around the room as if searching for an exit that no longer existed, but the lawyer continued, steady as a drumbeat. I leave the house she called home even when others tried to make her a stranger to it. I leave the savings built from quiet years of work, the accounts protected from careless hands. I leave the memories, the ones no lie could erase, the ones forged long before illness and ambition clouded clearer judgment. There was a murmur at the back of the room, a rustle of disbelief. Aunt Marla's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a beached fish gasping for air. The lawyer turned the page, his tone sharpening almost imperceptibly. To those who stood only in proximity, not in spirit. To those who measured love by convenience and loyalty by opportunity. I leave. Nothing, no apology, no explanations. Just the clean, surgical severing of ties too diseased to save. May you find in yourselves the lessons you failed to learn from me. The final words landed like stones dropped into a still pond, sending silent ripples through every corner of the house. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood, letting the truth settle into every uncomfortable silence, every averted gaze, every dry throat and flushed cheek. For once, I didn't have to defend myself. Dad had already done it, with clarity sharper than any accusation, and love stronger than any betrayal. The applause that had greeted Sarah's tearful speeches was gone now, replaced by a thick, stunned quiet. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't dared hope for. Vindication. Not in shouted victory. Not in cruel revenge, but in the simple, irrefutable truth that had always been mine, waiting patiently for its moment. I didn't stay for the aftermath. Didn't wait to hear the stammered excuses or the frantic backpedaling. I simply nodded once to the lawyer, turned on my heel, and walked out the front door into the cool, late afternoon air. The sky had shifted. While we were inside, the heavy gray clouds breaking apart, letting through slivers of sunlight that painted the lawn in gold and shadow. The wind stirred the branches overhead, carrying the faint, clean scent of rain and something older, something quieter. Forgiveness? No, not today. Not ever. Some things weren't meant to be mended. Some endings deserved their full weight. I paused. At the edge of the driveway, feeling the worn concrete under my shoes, the crispness of the envelope still tucked safely in my coat. Behind me, the house buzzed with rising confusion, voices growing sharper, a door slamming somewhere inside. The illusion was crumbling, and I didn't have to lift a single finger. Across the street, a little boy tossed a red ball up into the air, laughing as it bounced wildly across the pavement. His mother called him back with a soft, tired smile. Life, messy and honest and real, moving on just as it always had, without permission, without apology. I let out a slow breath, feeling the last tight knot in my chest loosen, unspooling into something lighter. Not joy exactly, not victory in the way the movies would show. But peace. Quiet, earned, and absolute. I turned away from the house, my house now, though it already felt like something smaller, something shed, and walked toward the horizon where the sun was breaking free. No applause, no cheers, only the steady beat of my own steps and the whisper of the world, still turning, still waiting for whatever came next. And that, I thought, was enough.